They didn't intend to publish the report. As Alan Dulles said, one of the top people running the investigation, the American people don't read. But as it turned out, some of us do.
Welcome to the End of Innocence. I'm your host, John Young. I want to apologize for not releasing a podcast last week. I had to be out of town on some business, and then when I got back, I ran into some technical difficulties. In today's episode, we're going to do a brief overview of the Jim Garrison investigation, which would end in the acquittal of Clay Shaw. I know many of you out there may disagree with this, but Jim Garrison goes down as an American hero in my book for having the courage to find out what really happened on November 22, 1963. And I think one day, not sure when that day will be, history will show that he was a lot closer to finding the truth than the Warren Commission ever did.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route. There's numerous people running up the hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Simmons Freeway. Several police officers are rushing up the hill at this time. Stand by.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
This just in from Dallas, Homicide Chief Captain Will Fritz said today the assassination case against Lee Harvey Oswald is cinched. He said flatly, this is the man that killed President Kennedy. 24-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald.
Come on, man. President. No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I live in Missouri. I'm just a patsy. President. Shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's the man with a gun.
Full name is Lee Harvey Oswald, O-S-W-A-L-D.
We had learned within days that Oswald spent the summer in New Orleans. I was still district attorney. So that meant I might have an obligation to look into it because I should find out what he was doing in New Orleans.
In New Orleans, Jim Garrison discovered Lee Harvey Oswald had been arrested for disturbing the peace by distributing Fair Play for Cuba leaflets and went on television to talk about his Marxist philosophies.
These then are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
Oswald, a supposed Castro sympathizer, was working out of the offices of one of the most rapid anti-communists in New Orleans, Guy Bannister, who was a private detective and former Chicago bureau chief for the FBI. Also seen often in this office was David Ferry, another fanatic anti-communist and CIA pilot. An employee of Guy Bannister's, Jack Martin, told Garrison confidentially that David Ferry had left his home the afternoon of the assassination in a heavy thunderstorm to drive to Houston and then to Galveston. Questioned by Garrison in 1963, Ferry denied knowing Oswald and said he had gone to Houston to go ice skating. Garrison turned Ferry over to the FBI, who released him with an apology. For the next 3 years, Garrison forgot about Ferry. During that period, it never occurred to him, a former military man who respected authority, to question the conclusions of the Warren Report, until a chance conversation with Senator Russell Long, in which the senator expressed his doubts about the integrity of the Warren Report.
I recall my reply almost exactly. I think I said something in a state of surprise. That, are you suggesting that there really was something more to it, that there might be a cover-up by the government? And his words were along the line of, well, that's a mild way to put it.
This chance conversation with Senator Long led to one of the most spectacular and ominous trials in New Orleans history. And it all began the day Garrison ordered 3 sets of the 26 volumes of the Warren Report and began reading them.
We had a copy in the car, we had a copy in the office, and at his home. I'd pick him up in the morning, he had his volume with him, read it in the automobile, in the office, at night taking him home. Weekends and Sundays and holidays, that's all he did. And I'll say this, he just about knew that 26 volume verbatim. To show you how cosmically irrelevant the Warren Report is for the most part, to hide those little rare pieces of relevance. One of the exhibits is classified in the front as a study of the teeth of Jack Ruby's mother. Even if Jack Ruby had intended to bite Oswald to death, that still would not have been relevant.
In the Warren Report, Garrison discovered a New Orleans attorney, Dean Andrews, was contacted on November 23rd to represent Lee Harvey Oswald. Garrison then learned that this call to Dean Andrews came from a Clay Bertrand, and that wasn't the first time that this man named Bertrand would be supposedly helping Oswald.
Dean Andrews was was being visited by Lee Oswald with regard to some legal problems he had with his wife, Marina, and we found that the man who used the name Clay Bertrand was making the payments.
Informants told Garrison that Clay Bertrand was also seen at the offices of Guy Bannister, along with Oswald and Ferry. Having established Ferry had lied about knowing Oswald and ice skating in Houston, Garrison officially but secretly opened his investigation.
We started digging into Oswald's background, his acquaintances, found he was being used and manipulated for some reason, dug back into those witnesses, and ultimately found ourselves dancing with the Central Intelligence Agency.
Jim went into what I call a tirade about the CIA, our CIA killing our president. And I had heard this so many times, and I was tired from my trip to Houston. And I really didn't know anything else to say, and I wanted to go home. And I just said, in a down way, I said, Jim, if the CIA killed the president, there's nothing a chicken shit assistant DA from New Orleans is going to be able to do about it. And sort of resigned that I was probably going to get fired for that comment. And he started laughing in his wonderful laugh, and then looked at me and said, there's probably nothing a chicken shit DA is going to be able to do about it either.
I thought, like most investigation, within a couple of months, it would come to a conclusion. I never figured it would mushroom the way it did.
On the trail of Clay Bertrand, Garrison found witnesses who said he matched the description of Clay Shaw. Clay Shaw was president of the International Trade Mart and one of New Orleans' most prominent citizens. With evidence that Oswald and Ferry were associates and that Shaw might be the mysterious Clay Bertrand, Garrison was about to step up his investigation when the story unexpectedly broke on February 17, 1967.
There is no question in my mind, but what there will be in time, arrests of individuals following our investigation. And there is no question in my mind, but what in time to come there will be charges and there will be convictions based on the charges.
David Ferry called the press to confirm that Garrison had been questioning him. Then he called Garrison's lead investigator, Lou Ivon.
Dave called my house, and my wife answered the phone and went and talked to me. And he's highly excited. He's got on the phone with him, and he's scared for his life.
Seeing the stories about Ferry and an assassination plot, a young insurance salesman who was to become Garrison's key witness stepped forward, Perry Russo.
I told them about a summer of '63 that I had gone up to Dave Ferry's apartment. Ferry was in control of the gathering, and he was in one of his obsessive evenings concerning his hatred of the President of the United States.
Russo told Garrison he overheard Ferry, Oswald, some Cubans, and Clay Bertrand discussing a plot to kill Kennedy in Crossfire. Russo came forward because he said he was only there by chance and he didn't want to be accidentally implicated in Garrison's investigation. Russo subsequently picked out a picture of Clay Bertrand. It was Clay Shaw.
Shaw was introduced to me as Bertrand.
Within a week of the first story, Garrison's office got its last frantic phone call from David Ferry. Here's Lou Ivon talking about that phone call with Ferry.
So there, just hold still. I'll be right over. Got a hold of Jim, and we made arrangements to put him in the old Fountain Blue.
Lou Ivon stayed with Ferry at the Fountain Blue till early morning. Ferry confided to him that he, Oswald, Bannister, and Clay Shaw were all CIA. Lou left Ferry about 4 in the morning.
And then, of course, the next thing we found, we got a call that he was dead in his apartment on Louisiana Avenue.
It reads as follows: to leave this life is for me a sweet prospect.
Ferry left typed, not handwritten suicide notes. With Ferry's death, Garrison felt he had to move quickly to arrest Clay Shaw. Otherwise, he might find more typed suicide notes. On March 1st, 1967, Clay Shaw was taken into custody for conspiracy to murder President John F. Kennedy. Garrison's investigator Lou Ivon describes what they found when they went to Clay Shaw's house to arrest him.
There were marble statues of penises on his dresser. There were whips and chains in his closet. And there were hooks and beams with handprints next to them. And there were also leather straps in his bedroom that could very conceivably be used to tie a person's hands to those hooks. What they were looking for was any documents that would link these parties together.
In Shaw's phone book, Garrison found a Texas post office box number that corresponded to one in Oswald's phone book. When Clay Shaw was booked on March 1st, 1967, no one outside of Garrison's office knew that they were also looking for Clay Bertrand.
Never released to the public. Nobody knew that, and no police officer knew about a Clay Bertrand.
Garrison investigator Lou Ivon said that when Clay Shaw was booked and fingerprinted, the booking officer, Aloysius Haberhorse, asked Clay Shaw as a matter of routine procedure if he used any aliases. Clay Shaw said yes, Clay Bertrand. Garrison said Shaw was helping to create an identity for Oswald, who would then become the perfect patsy.
Not only did we not have the cooperation of the federal government, but in fact, they were the enemy. We had 12 assistant DAs, I believe, and maybe about 10 investigators. No agency, law enforcement agency was cooperating with us, even our own police department.
Attorney Mark Lane, who in 1966 wrote the best-selling critique of the Warren Commission entitled Rush to Judgment, was contacted by Garrison in the spring of 1968. Here's Lane talking about that initial phone call with Garrison.
He called me and said, you know about my situation, you know what I'm doing down here? And I said, yes, I do. He said, would you come down and just take a look at us, at what we're doing down here? And I said, sure. And I had a 1-year lease for this place at Stanford University. I canceled it in 15 minutes.
Under Louisiana law, Jim Garrison could have indicted Clay Shaw himself, but to assure the public he was protecting Clay Shaw's rights and his own office's procedures in case of appeal, Garrison brought Shaw before a grand jury. The grand jury heard the evidence and moved to indict. To further test his case and further protect Clay Shaw's rights, Jim Garrison then asked for a preliminary hearing before a 3-judge panel. Shaw's defense team tried to introduce the Warren report as evidence. The judges refused, ruling the Warren report hearsay. Getting the indictment against Clay Shaw came quickly. Getting Clay Shaw to trial would take 2 years.
The news media's reaction to Garrison, I attributed to their feelings towards Shaw initially. But then it became directed in a very bitter fashion towards Garrison, as though there was something sinister about Jim Garrison, something dangerously sinister.
But they think our efforts to objectify our witness are something sinister, and we just don't have time to fool with it. So we give lie detectors now to witnesses we think are lying.
The day after Jim Garrison arrested Clay Shaw, Attorney General Ramsey Clark had a blundering encounter with the press in Washington and provided Garrison with another credibility boost. Emerging from a Senate confirmation hearing on his nomination, Clark answered questions about events in New Orleans by saying that Clay Shaw had been investigated by the FBI in 1963 and cleared. Clark's statement was a simple mistake. He should have said Bertrand had been investigated. That same day, the mistake by Ramsey Clark was compounded when a befuddled spokesman for the Department of Justice pressed on the issue, said of Bertrand and Shaw, quote, "We think it's the same guy," end quote.
They had substantial data by that time because we had. Clay Shaw, for example, had been with the Central Intelligence Agency ever since he was with the Mississippi River Shipping Company.
Prior to the Shaw trial, Garrison got a boost in his case when attorney Dean Andrews was convicted of perjury for lying to a grand jury when he said Clay Shaw was not Clay Bertrand.
And that was a very important conviction, but that's never mentioned.
Got no help from the FBI or any records that we were trying to get, investigative records, which ordinarily we would have got. Got no help at all.
Garrison would have gladly stepped back and turned everything he had, including manpower, over to any legitimate federal authority that wanted to continue that investigation.
Declassified FBI documents reveal that Bill Alford was right. Columnist Jack Anderson, acting as a hostile liaison for the agency, came away from New Orleans convinced that Garrison had a case, one which Garrison offered to the agency. The FBI declined.
In the preparation for the trial of Clay Shore by the district attorney's office was the feeling in the district attorney's office that the case would never get to trial anyway.
Either because of his death or for some other reason.
We had 2 men assigned to Jim around the clock when all these threats were coming from morning till night.
We were a close family, and my mother made sure that even though they had policemen and they would bring us to school and all, it wasn't any scary situation or anything because we were a close family.
We used to kind of play with the police officer. He was more of a companion.
Yeah, it was great.
Than, kind of a sign that something was wrong or we should be worried about something. It's just one of those things where you grow up that way. That's the way you think. It doesn't seem that peculiar or different.
When you got bored playing with one of the other kids, they had this adult who was there, or so we thought, to entertain us, not to protect us.
One day, Mom decided, I guess, to get us all out of the house and said that we were going to go to the store because she was going to bake a cake. And on the way there, I guess in the rearview mirror, she picked up an FBI car, had picked her up, and so she kind of made it like a game. She was trying to lose them, but every corner we turned, they turned. It's like, losing, Mom, losing, but I don't think she ever did.
I'm not a person inclined to be unduly fearful. But if somebody is removed, as I am, from normally from the reach of people in the killing business, if I reach a point of where I was concerned about the possibility of that happening, you can just visualize the concern of people at a less protected level.
I was digging up some information, actually, for Jim Garrison and Penn Jones Jr. of Midlothian. I was digging up some information that they wanted, in Dallas. Mm-hmm. And I parked my car on the side of the street, and I went to get this information. And when I came back and cranked up my car, it blew up.
That was former Dallas police officer Roger Craig, who was hospitalized for 2 months. He later reportedly committed suicide with a rifle.
I don't like to go into that because they have families and everything else, but we lost a few witnesses by physical reasons, just like Dallas did.
Anybody that would approach him, he would bring him on board. And he was one of our biggest security leaks in the office, Jim himself. It's sad to say, without him knowing it.
One man, as I remarked recently to Mark Lane, had me wondering why he always carried such a large briefcase. And it was almost as big as a suitcase. And I realize now the reason he was carrying such a large briefcase was he could take home more of our documents every day.
We had people that was brought aboard that later on and we found that they wasn't working for the interest of the investigation or for Jim. And I'm talking about people that were giving our records away.
One of the temporary members that was brought in on Jim Garrison's staff was giving files over to Clay Shaw's attorneys.
If they can't remove you, and they do assassinate in the United States, and they've been doing it for years, and I'm sure they still do, because there's no reason for them to change their policies. Now they've been continually successful. If they can't kill you, they concentrate on discreditation.
In June of 1967, NBC News broadcast a white paper attempting to discredit Jim Garrison's case and his witnesses. This special was led by NBC's investigative reporter Walter Sheridan, and we covered it a couple episodes ago. Here's Garrison's star witness Perry Russo talking about his meeting with Walter Sheridan.
He was not investigating any fact. His only purpose was, and he stated it pointedly, he said, I'm going to take Garrison out of this. He says, you're going down with him. He says, if you want to go, he says, you go with him because he says, you're finished. He says, now there is a way out. And I said, what would that be? He said, you go over to Biloxi, Mississippi. He said, we have a motel over there. He says, you're to walk in the motel. Clay Shaw will be in there, and you're to walk out and state on television that you do not know Clay Shaw. You have never seen him.
Unbeknownst to NBC's investigative reporter Walter Sheridan, Perry Russo had been pre-wired for sound by Jim Garrison to record their conversation.
You're to state that Oswald was never at Dave Ferry's apartment. You know nothing about any Kennedy plotters or any plot to kill the President of the United States. And I said, if I do that, what do you suppose would happen to me in New Orleans?
Perry Russo is an amazing witness. You have to remember that the defense and the federal government and anyone interested in destroying Jim Garrison's case had 2 years to work on Perry Raymond Russo.
So I said, I wouldn't be able to even live in New Orleans. He says, what state are you interested in living in? And I was caught off guard by this, and so I said, I've always been interested in California. He said, what city? I said, I don't know. L.A., Los Angeles. I said, it's always been the city of dreams.
They worked on one of our main witnesses, Perry Russo, offered him a job at an insurance company in California.
I didn't go to Biloxi because what Walter Sheridan was asking me to do was an absolute lie. Shaw was there, Ferry was there, Oswald was there. Garrison, subsequent to this, indicted him for tampering and obstructing justice. Of course, that indictment fell in federal court. He never went to trial.
They didn't want to just discredit Jim Garrison. They wanted him destroyed.
What's that? You say that you are an American citizen and you want to see the autopsy x-rays and you want to see these hundreds of documents?
After the NBC special ran against Garrison, the Federal Communications Commission found the NBC white paper biased and ordered NBC to give Garrison a half hour to respond.
What's the matter with you? Can't you take the word of these honorable men who've looked into it for you?
As a result of an appearance by satirist Mort Saul on The Tonight Show, Garrison was seen again on NBC.
So then he came out. He said, what are you doing these days, Mort? And Mort said, I'm an investigator for Jim Garrison. Oh, really? I mean, he was floored, although he just heard that 2 hours before. And he said, yeah. And then he said, we've uncovered a lot of interesting things. Johnny, why don't you ever have Jim Garrison as a guest on the show? At that point, there was an ovation from the audience. And Johnny sort of quieted him down and said, well, I'd like to if they will allow me to do that.
Because Garrison was sometimes impatient or profane with the press, Mark Lane and Mort Saul decided to rehearse him.
But Mort and I will be Johnny Carson. We'll ask you the tough questions. And you just remain really calm. He said, I can do that, Mark. I said, okay, fine. Is it true you got a mental discharge from the Air Force? Those fucking guys, I the fucking question, got up and started running around the room. I said, well, this is the problem, Jim. So we went over and over it. And then he felt he was prepared. We had a lot easier job preparing Jim than they had preparing Johnny. Jim won the day, and Jim got tremendous applause from the audience, obviously. And it was the first time that the American people heard that kind of an allegation made on network television.
On January 29, 1969, almost 2 years after his arrest, Clay Shaw went on trial for conspiracy in the killing of President John F. Kennedy.
We knew he would commit perjury. While we felt we would win the first case, we knew that he had to lie about his associations with Oswald and Ferry, and that's where we had our strongest witnesses.
Some of Garrison's strongest witnesses placing Shaw and Oswald together came from the small town of Clinton, Louisiana. Months before the assassination, Shaw, in creating a background for Oswald, had tried to get him a job at a state mental institution. To qualify for such a job, though, Oswald first had to be a registered Democrat. Mark Lane said the day Shaw drove Oswald to register, they accidentally encountered black civil rights workers also trying to register while being heckled by members of the White Citizens Council.
And all of a sudden, this big black limousine came into town, and the KKK and their friends in the Sheriff's Department thought this must be the FBI. They're probably on the side of these black people, and the black protesters knew this car did not belong to them, and were sure that this must be part of the operation against them, and everybody studied the car. Everybody. And they all looked in the car, and they all saw Shaw, and they all saw Oswald.
Garrison tried to subpoena Allen Dulles and Richard Helms of the CIA so they could be questioned about Oswald or Shaw's involvement with the agency. Federal officials declined to serve them, and only as a result of another subpoena was Garrison able to obtain the film of Abraham Zapruder. A jury of American citizens would see the Zapruder film for the first time in its entirety. Nearly 12 years later, Dallas-Fort Worth journalist Gary Mack made available to the House Select Committee on Assassinations the dictabelt of motorcycle officer H.B. McLean, which Mack discovered had, on the day of the assassination, accidentally recorded at least 4 gunshots in Dealey Plaza.
the first thing even a child has to do is look this through the film. After the shot hits him in the head, the critical shot, John Kennedy goes backwards towards the back of the car. So he's almost blown out of the back of the car. John Kennedy was obviously shot from the front. Everybody knows it, and especially the government.
As compelling as the Zapruder film was, and as believable as Garrison witnesses were, one witness his staff agrees cost him the case: Charles Spizell.
The question I posed to Jimmy is, didn't anyone talk to this guy before you put him on the stand?
An accountant in New York City who had said that he had met Shaw and Oswald at a party.
We had no idea that he had this sort of background or would admit to this sort of background.
On cross-examination, this accountant testified that when his daughter came back to him from Louisiana, instead of saying, "Hello, darling," he brought her into the room in his apartment and fingerprinted her, and then checked the fingerprints against those on file to make sure it was really his own daughter, and that the government had not substituted a duplicate for her. The jury heard this, and this was the end.
I have always felt that he was one of those plants.
The case had been destroyed by calling that one witness. I did go to the Hall of Records in Louisiana and found out that that building had, at the time this gentleman said, met Shaw and Oswald there, been owned by Clay Shaw.
Garrison's case would take another major hit. In a surprising move, Judge Haggerty would not allow Aloysius Haberhorst, the booking officer, to testify that while being routinely booked, Clay Shaw said his alias was Clay Bertrand. On March 1st, 1969, the jury acquitted Clay Shaw. Polled afterwards, most jurors felt that there had been a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, but there was insufficient evidence to link Clay Shaw to it. Since Shaw had denied under oath knowing either Ferry or Oswald, Garrison then moved to try him for perjury.
In a move which is, I still think, highly illegal and probably unprecedented, the local federal courts gave an order that we could not prosecute him. Reasons are still obscure, but they blocked the prosecution, and it would have been an absolute certainty of conviction.
A few years after the trial, a photograph surfaced which showed three men at a party, identified as David Ferry, Clay Shaw, and Lee Harvey Oswald. Garrison was asked by reporters after the trial if he had it to do all over again, would he? He says, quote, "Yes, I would. I would have to, because once you know that something was hidden, once you know what happened, then you have no choice," end quote. After the trial, media and city leaders called for Garrison's resignation. The voters re-elected him. With Garrison still in a legal position to pursue the case, the government pursued him.
Hounded, harassed by a variety of government assets and agencies, the FBI, for example.
He was prosecuted himself on two separate occasions after the trial of Clay Shaw. Once he was charged with accepting a bribe. In essence, he not only won that case and was totally exonerated, but it was nevertheless the springboard for the next case, which basically was that he failed to report income and pay income tax on the bribe, which he had never received, and he won that case as well.
The unbelievable stress of the past 2 years accentuated problems in the marriage. Jim and his wife Liz divorced.
There were pressures that my wife felt, and so each one of us had to end up being an entirely different person, although she was relatively easy to live with, a very sweet person. So, but I think it was a weight on the scale, certainly.
My mother has always wanted just a close family, a normal family life for her kids, and there was no way that a normal family could exist in that situation, but sure put a lot of pressure on it. But as to say that was the exact or the only reason, I don't know.
Too busy defending himself to function officially as district attorney, Garrison lost in his bid for a third term. He spent 4 years in private practice, wrote a novel, and won election to the Louisiana Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal. In his second term, he ran unopposed.
And I realized I was suddenly an object of interest to the agency. I guess I might have assumed that earlier, but it didn't occur to me. I guess part of me still thought I was living in the country I was born in. So the conclusion I would give you was they did everything they could to tear the office apart, to tear the trial apart. And they did tear the trial apart. But the time came when I was no longer district attorney. Whatever their explicit objectives were, they accomplished them. But I would have to reply. On the other hand, the agency, when it was all over, they knew they'd been danced with.
On July 18, 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded there had been a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. The House Select Committee conclusions finally vindicated Jim Garrison and the other critics of the Warren Report. Jim Garrison, who retired from the bench in October 1991, just short of his 70th birthday, may have found greater vindication, though not from Washington, but from Hollywood. Oliver Stone made JFK based in part on Jim Garrison's investigation and prosecution of Clay Shaw. Whatever flaws critics said the film had, it brought to the people a perspective on the assassination not explored or avoided by the nation's media. It also brought consolation and hope to Jim Garrison's children.
There's so much criticism of it because they're saying it distorts history, but what's the alternative except the Warren Commission is history? I hope it succeeds in at least letting people know that something wasn't right and they should be more skeptical of what their government tells them and what they read in the papers.
I wish I could say in heroic words that yes, I would do it again. But actually, what the investigation cost me, a magnificent office which took years to build up, and a tremendous amount of emotional involvement, not unrelated to my personal concern about what happened to John Kennedy and what was obviously happening to America. I'd say that I don't know if I would do it again because of the emotional price I paid.
Jim Garrison said he never felt like a hero. Being district attorney, he was just doing his job. The real heroes, he said, were the individual American citizens who in pursuit of the truth often jeopardized their jobs and even their lives. Jim Garrison died on October 21, 1992. He was a true American hero.